It's welcome to not game theory, but there are going to be plenty of game theories with this stream. One moment. Hang on. Usually have the game muted out outside of streams because I do have a tendency to play this game, to do some grinding at this game while listening to YouTube videos and the like. So, anyway, so as I've said before, I do have a number of theories to go over. At least 18 and counting. So, amongst the theory, so, and like I said, a lot of these theories, kind of like I said in the Discord post and the tweet, a lot of these theories do have to do with the future of this game's story, where it's going. So, one of them is, some theories as to various works of literature that there could be future Kantos based on, particularly after Kanto. I'd say Kanto after Kanto 13, because I suspect that Kanto 13 is probably gonna heavily play on Dante's Inferno. I am aware the prologue played on it quite a bit, but the prologue played only on the prologue of Dante's Inferno itself. I suspect that Kanto 13 is probably gonna draw a lot of inspiration and, be rather heavily based on stuff from Dante's Inferno after the prologue. And I actually jotted down some notes. They're on my iPod, hence why they're not on screen. So one of them is Alice in Wonderland. This is in large part because one moment. There. Oh, that ain't right. Okay. Alright, so one of the... There you go. So there was a webcomic put out by Project Moon back in 2020 through March 2020 through April 2021. Although it's been taken down from as it says here, it's been taken down from publication as of August 2023. What's worth noting about the fact that it's taken down from publication, that was also the case with Distortion Detective back when Project Moon decided to back when they decided to make Distortion Detective from a whatever the heck they initially planned it to be, because I'm not sure if it was like a comic or visual novel or web novel or something like that. And instead make it a game instead. So that kind of makes me think that they're probably going to play on this, and they're probably going to draw on this for being a future Kanto. As for who the Kanto might focus on, well, kind of like I said, this is kind of for Kantos that are after Kanto 13. So it may very well be that the Kantos after that point may not actually focus on just one sinner. They might focus on several. So in this part, in the case of Alice, having one that focuses, or one based on Alice in Wonderland, the two most likely sinners that I can think of that get focused during such a Kanto would be Heathcliff and Don Quixote. Don Quixote because, well, she'd fit in pretty well for kind of being a sort of stand-in for Alice, wouldn't she? And as for Heathcliff, well, because Alice in Wonderland is British literature. Of course, kind of another reason as for why I think there'd be a Kanto focusing on that is because of the fact that the webcomic is actually set at a Lobotomy Corporation branch, and quite a bit of Limbus Company has involved going to various branches of Lobotomy Corporation to get a golden bow. Presumably, each branch has a golden bow. Pardon the little interruption there. I'm a little thirsty. Okay. Let's see. I also suspect that Through the Looking Glass is also going to be played on rather heavily for a Kanto, and it might be the same Kanto or maybe the one immediately after. Kind of tough to say. The reason why is because, well, Looking Glass is another term for mirror, and the whole thing with mirror worlds and mirror worlds, as well as the technology involved in that, it's been a very big theme with the game. And as for how it ended up playing on it, I would actually be quite surprised if it does not involve traveling to one of the mirror worlds somehow. Plus, what's more is that, let's see, if I remember right, let's see. So if I remember right, with Heathcliff, oh shoot, don't quite remember which page I saw it on. There's I think at the last GDC, there's an interview where they stated that every version of Heathcliff, including Heathcliff Prime, i.e. the one that's on the LCB team, is able to travel between mirror worlds. Pardon me. And it would be kind of odd, particularly with like how the mirror worlds have significance to the game's overall plot. It would be kind of odd if at some point a means to travel between mirror worlds beyond just a given person being able to do so. It seems like it would end up coming up. Let's see. Journey to the West is another one that I think might end up being played on. This one is mostly a hunch, though. There really isn't, I'll be honest, there really isn't much evidence or anything to support that hunch, because really the basis for it is that Journey to the West is a very prominent work of literature in a lot of the Far East. So it's not just Japan and China. I believe it does have some presence in. It would surprise me if it doesn't have at least some presence in Korean culture. And I think it also has like some presence in for India because the West that they were that the characters were on a journey to was India, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, and as for which sinners would probably mostly get a focus during such a kanto, kind of my hunch is that it'd be Ryoshu, Honglu, and Yi Sang, mostly because, well, they're basically Japanese, Chinese, and Korean respectively. So, but like I said, that one's a hunch. Lord of the Flies is another one. Actually, there we go. Easiest way to show deck should be to just I think it was on this page. Yeah, the decisive weapons. Yeah, one of them is known as the Lord of Flies. Well, yeah, it's awfully on the nose for that book title. Not to mention the plot. Considering the plot and tone of the book, it would actually fit pretty well with the setting for Limbus Company. Why the heck does it keep showing up in an ad for Coors? I don't even drink alcohol at all. For religious reasons, no less. Let's see. I also kind of have a hunch that. Okay, so there's also two. Obviously, it's got to play on the Odyssey for Otis's Focus Kanto. Kanto 11. I have a hunch though that it's going to play on that. There may have been. Well, that kanto might play on the Iliad a bit, largely because that story, which was also written by Homer, basically the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey essentially picks up right where the Iliad ends. Although with the Odyssey, it specifically focuses on Odysseus' journey home. The Iliad, however, among other things, does explain how it is that Odysseus, ended up trying to go on this harrowing journey home. And I have covered, with regards to how the Iliad would play into it, I have kind of covered some of that with one of my earlier streams, because what's kicked off the plot for the Iliad was Eris, the goddess of chaos. Well, back up a little bit. So Aphrodite and Hephaestus were getting married, and all the gods of Olympus were invited to the wedding, except for Eris, because nobody wants chaos and discord at a wedding. Well, she showed up anyway, tried to get in, but wasn't allowed, so she throws a golden apple over the gates and into the party, and shouts that it's for the most beautiful goddess. Well, eventually, it ended up coming down to being a dispute between Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena. And they ended up going to Paris, the Prince of Troy, to try and settle the dispute. And each one tries to offer him something, and should he decide that they deserve the golden apple. Hera says, "Give me the golden apple and you will be the greatest of kings." Athena says, "Give me the golden apple and you will be the wisest of men." And then Aphrodite says, "Give me the golden apple and you will have Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in the world." And actually, he picked Aphrodite. And I also kind of touched on that theory a bit in the context of as he was way at the end with the last episode. Hang on.
얽힘이라는 공간과 거리라니 한쪽이 그 흔적이 다시 드러나는 것. 네.
Huh. I wasn't being terribly responsive there.
음성으로 대화하는 것은 우리
Okay.
이 바쁜 시기에 파우스트죠. 어머. 네. 순진한 파운. 그 질문을 꼭 해요. 어디 한번 드러나 보죠. 림버스 컴퍼니 본사의 보안 그런 것 하나 알아내지만 권위가 낮은 파우스 접근 권위에 대해 게젤 샤프트의 정보에 접근하기 위해 제가 다분히 고의적인 말실수네요. 순진한 파우스트는 매번 게젤 샤프트의 정보를 날로 사랑스럽고 음험한 파우스트는 림버스 컴퍼니의 대표. 조금만 생각해봐도 알 수 있는 사실을 바뀐 호칭이 잘 어울리네요. 멍청한 파우스트는 화가 난 걸까요? 관리자 파우스트도 아니면서 그렇다면 불가능한 가정을 구태여 세운 멍청한 파우스트가 제일 많은 황금가지를 복원했다지.
Let's see.
다시 관리도 묘목을 심고.
Okay. So it mentioned,
혹시 알아요?
so, here it mentions, planting, it mentions to plant the sapling and harvest an apple from it. Considering that they're golden boughs, it's not much of a stretch to assume that the apple itself would also be golden. Now, as to whether or not Diaz has any plans for what to do with, has any plans to actually, harvest an apple from it, I don't know. But considering that Diaz doesn't tend to, doesn't tend to supplant the head, well, she's gonna have to kind of break up that trio of, A Corp, B Corp, and C Corp, and the one that would be most beneficial to pull away would be B Corp. Not to mention, with that trio of goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, A Corp would probably be most analogous to Hera, while C Corp would be most analogous to Athena, which would leave B Corp as being analogous to Aphrodite. Forget brain farts, man. Let's see. Jason the Argonauts is another one because there was the Argo unit or whatever the heck they were called that Moses brought up during the Kanto. I don't quite remember which chapter it was in, so I can't just pull it up. Not to mention with Jason the Argonaut's kind of the MacGuffin of that story, the thing that Jason and the Argonauts, set out to obtain was the Golden Fleece. Well, there may not be a Golden Fleece in the setting, but Golden Fleece, Golden Bough seems close enough to me. Not to mention, I think that if I remember right, the Golden Fleece was hung from a tree. Let's see. Yeah, Ishmael also said earlier, Ishmael said something about the Belwart Trenches, which, based on a Google search, has to do with the American Civil War. The only story I know of that, the only work of literature that I know of set during or tied to the American Civil War is, was it Occurrence at Owl Creek? So, kind of puzzled about that one. Uh, well, since I'm on this part, there's this seems to have a lot of foreshadowing for Faust's Canto. In fact, there seems to be a lot of foreshadowing with Canto 9. You could probably refer to Season 7 as being the season of foreshadowing. Season 9, Season 7, Canto 9, whichever. I remember. Okay, so... Okay. There it is. So first off, it has a pretty similar icon to Faust's, but there's also the fact that the ego event, the mirror dungeon event from which you can get the ego, very closely parallels the that Walpurgis Nacht scene, or classic Walpurgis Nacht scene, where there is, I think what it was is that there's a bunch of homunculi or whatever within a flask, and there's one that was being, bullied or tormented by all the others. I think to the point that it being booted from it being removed from the flask by the others, and there's a choice to comfort that particular one, which would get you the ego gift. And that's a lot of that is rather interesting, particularly with how she's treated by the other Faust as being sort of a black sheep. Really interesting because one theory I have is that Faust may not actually be Faust. So how quite a few of the sinners, they have, with the game, there's been quite the recurring theme of there's been quite a recurring theme of identity in the game's story, and not just with IDs like these, but identity in the sense of a lot of characters having some sort of secret identity, if you will. For example, Hong Lu, his real name was actually Jia Bao Yu, and he's actually he's actually part of the, well, royal family, if you will, of H Corp. Uh, Ryoshu's real name is Yoshihide, and she was, you know, being raised by. She was raised by the. She was being raised by the House of Spiders to basically be a sort of living super weapon. Heathcliff, his real name is unknown. Only that it's not Heathcliff, much like in the book. Gregor has a secret identity of being the Roach Emperor, the fourth, final, and most powerful of the decisive weapons. Don Quixote's real name and identity is actually Sancho, a second kindred blood fiend. At least was second kindred. I guess she's technically first kindred now because she's the I guess because of the being the sole survivor of the La Mancha blood fiend family. Let's see. And with Otis, well, her real name is not Otis, and pretty much everything about her actual identity and history is redacted by the highest reaches of the company management. So I kind of wonder if maybe Faust's real name and identity is actually not Faust. And that name and identity may perhaps be the result of some sort of deal that she struck that allowed her to be connected to the Gesellschaft. And I kind of, my initial theory, and this is still the case, is that she might actually be analogous to Johann, although I guess in this case her real name might be Johanna. Because in the first and second tragedy of Faust, they're both plays, and they do seem to be the version of the story Faust that Limbus Company draws on most heavily. Johann is the one who created the homunculus, which, even though both the engine as well as the bus and the engine for that bus that the LCB team travels around in is called Mephistopheles. A lot of imagery, including but not limited to, might as well pull it up here because it's easier to see with this. The icon for Faust, it really brings to mind that of the homunculus. And what's more is let's just do a single extraction to show. This kind of resembles this does kind of resemble a sort of like ball of fire inside a container of sorts, which that's how the homunculus was actually described and looked like in that work. What's more is, if that's the case, then that would probably be explain part of the reason as to why it is that Faust is kind of looked down on by the other Fausts, or by Faust Prime is looked down on by the other Fausts. On top of that, it may very well be that there actually was a Faust that Faust Prime was an apprentice to, and maybe she made a deal of sorts that caused her to be connected to, that resulted in her being connected to the Gesellschaft, but also taking up the hello there, Black Silence. I'm going over some of the Limbus Company theories that I have. So I kind of have a hunch that Faust might have actually been the analogous to Johann from the first and second tragedy of Faust, especially with how the how Johann is the one that actually created the homunculus, which the homunculus seems to be very heavily played on with this game. Actually, come to think of it, it's the second tragedy of Faust, which basically there's a period of time that took place between the first and second tragedy. And it was during that period of time that the homunculus was created, and Faust, I think it's Faust and Mephistopheles, they travel around showing the homunculus the world. Somewhat like how the Mephistopheles, the bus, as well as its engine, are kind of traveling around the city. And it's worth noting that in the first and second tragedy of Faust, Johann really looked up to and admired Faust, but Faust just saw Johann as being annoying and kind of dumb. So that's kind of part of the theory that I have. Kind of another one is that during the classic of Walpurgis Nacht, where they basically used these sort of digital avatars instead of just appearing as themselves, it may very well be that Faust Prime called that classical of Walpurgis Nacht so as to perhaps try to conceal the fact that she's not the Faust from the world that the game takes place in. There's, granted, one does kind of, one might ask, well, how would they not notice from stuff like her, maybe the way that she thinks or her voice or that kind of thing? Well, consider the kind of stuff that exists in the city. It's entirely possible that perhaps by being, if she is analogous to Johann, it's quite likely that while under the real Faust's tutelage, she learned to think more like the real Faust, but not quite like the real Faust, and probably also got some modifications done so that her voice matches would match that of the real Faust. Let's see. Oh yeah. So kind of like I said, I suspect that Project Moon uses IDs for to be a bit of foreshadowing for a lot of the sinners, as well as how they are thematic in somewhat unexpected ways. Marisol is a rather good example on account of the fact that, among other things, there's his, Prince of La Mancha Land and Thumb East Capo ID. I suppose also this one as well, because as you can see with that portrait, he's got some mechanical augmentations there, which would make him an odd one out amongst all the N-Corp identities, or at least the ones released thus far. There's probably going to be more with the next Kanto, of course. But that said, I bring up the Thumb East Capo ID that he has because he's the only sinner that did not get a Heisho Pack ID during the previous season. As well as the Prince of La Mancha Land ID. That one's based on Cassetti, which, as such, one, he actually left, it's an ID that actually left that Mirror World's La Mancha Land, and two, it's also based on a Blood Fiend who also left it, and three, it was not added to the game with Kanto 7, or with Season 5. Well, he's the odd one out he's the odd one out. Or in other words, he's the stranger. Although he's got a lot, now that I think about it, he's got a lot of burn and bleed IDs. Because that's one other thing I've noticed a bit as well. There are some sinners that they will have certain keyword effects that are rather common amongst their IDs, and that does tie into the sinner. So, for example, with Yi Sang, whoops. So he's got a DSE association ID, which, okay, yeah. So the DAC association, okay, yeah, they're able to inflict sinking, which is supposed to be thematic with how they, they basically kind of, learn stuff, and then they kind of go through, or they kind of burn away that knowledge that they had by, when fighting because they just kind of convert that knowledge into power. How very literal minded. Okay, yeah, that one's rupture. Also, I think his base ID had, it inflicts some sinking as well. But that said, he's also got not one, not two, but 3 IDs that inflict sinking and that feature sinking that are quite powerful. Let's see. Whoops. Derp. Ishmael, in a similar way, has at least 2. I was thinking there's a third one for some reason. That features sinking rather heavily. There's her Bullard Boatworks Fixer and John's Office Rep. Did you... No, it's Tremor. Well, it's not much of it with her base ID. So, with Yi Sang, so with sinking, it tends to be associated with depression or despair, loss of sanity, or I guess madness, just kind of in general, and also tends to be referred to as like loss of knowledge or loss of memories, which makes me think that Ryoshu's capstone or bad end IDs probably get a feature sinking, although that's assuming that she's actually going to get one this season. I could have sworn Honglu already got his by this point in season 6. Not to mention, kind of the whole thing is that her, the whole thing with wielding the Uriah Shiki erases, using its power, it erases whatever it cuts through, and will even cut away a lot of her own memories. So, what if that capstone, what if that bad end ID isn't going to be added on the grounds that it erased itself? Rodian also has a few that feature sinking. They're relatively recent, though. I mean, there's these two. I mean, this one is kind of a hybrid of sinking and bleed, but it features sinking more than bleed. Okay, maybe not. Although the Marisol's counterpart ID features a lot more bleed than sinking. Tends to be a bit better at maintaining multicolor rouge as well. Well, inflicting and maintaining it. Well, you saying he's been in sort of like depressed lethargy of sorts for quite some time. He still seems to be in a bit of a funk. It seems like he's still been in a bit of a funk since Kanto 4, although he has gotten better. Ishmael went through a lot of sanity slippage during her focus Kanto. As for why it is that her bad end ID does not feature sinking, my guess is because that one isn't losing sanity, but rather has lost about as much as she can. Not to mention, it's kind of a bit more thematic with, Burn and Bleed's probably a bit more thematic with. Wait, it was all just Burn and Bleed, right? No poise? Okay, so there was some poise. That's a bit more thematic with Ahab anyway. As for Rodion, she's rather depressed by the fact that she wants to be special, and she's kind of depressed that she really isn't, because of that she really isn't, particularly with all the various other sinners that she's surrounded by. I mean, Otis and Gregor are both Smoke War veterans. Marisalt's, well, he was with N Corp, but he was a very capable individual. He's the heir to, he was part of a very wealthy family. She was raised to be a living super weapon. She's an extremely powerful, centuries-old blood fiend. These two are both brilliant scientists, and so on and so on. But kind of connected to that is that, particularly with Ryoshi's more recent IDs, I suspect that it does kind of seem to suggest that she might actually be special, just not quite in a way that she thinks just not in a way that she might prefer or notice. That, well, basically she's better than she thinks she is. And interesting enough, these IDs, because she's also been getting quite a few that are actually very powerful, ever since after the time-killing time event. So there's, the Princess of La Mancha Land, who in Marisol, the uptie story for Marisol's Prince of La Mancha Land ID, it turns out that she actually told Marisol to leave on the night of the raid on La Mancha Land that saw it destroyed. With her Heisho Pack branch ID, I might be misinterpreting a bit, but she somewhat disobeyed an order that she was on, which is supposed to actually be very unusual for a member of the Heisho Pack, because the bolus is supposed to make them, extremely loyal, almost unquestioningly so. Her Sword Sharpened with Tears ID has her, with that one, she actually wants, she wants to be recognized as special by the Knight of Despair, but the reason she isn't is because she actually is special. So much so that the director is, the manager's not having her get the Knight of Despair's blessing. Her Ring Falvist Docent ID, well, it's the highest ranking ring ID aside from Hong Lu's ring ID. And even then, can't exactly count that one because, while yes, he's a maestro, he's also exiled from the ring. And what's more is, compare him to the Ring Falvist Maestro, he's also quite weak. like I said, yeah, he does seem to be quite weak in comparison. Um, Not to mention, he's also stated that his art, that Calypso's artwork was stagnating, which may also imply that which would suggest that his strength kind of reached a plateau of sorts. What's also worth noting is that I suspect Rodion is going to play a rather big part in the story for Kanto 10 because of how she's had a couple IDs rather recently that tie very closely and strongly to two of Marisolt's IDs. Namely, this one ties to his Wingfowl of a student, and this one ties very closely to his Prince of La Mancha Land ID. So how exactly that's going to come into play, I'm not quite sure yet. Guess we'll have to wait and see. Wait for that one to play out. Let's see. Oh. I have rather extensive theory regarding Otis. Oh, okay, I did mention Kanto 10. So, I don't really know a whole lot about L'Étranger, this novel that was used for the source of inspiration for Marisolt. But considering some of the stuff that's been stated, like how the League of Nine were going to be involved in that board meeting, I kind of have a suspicion that Marisolt's mother might actually be on the board and is perhaps among the ones who grip. Uh, Although his mother might play, well, if she's not on the board, she's probably going to have a posthumous role in the game. Or, she's probably going to have a posthumous role in the story. Let's see. And, while still on the subject of N-Corp, so I'm not sure if the League of Nine, with their goal of destroying the various mirror worlds, is just remember too, because there's like one other story I didn't write down when I didn't jot down my notes because I thought of it much more recently. So in the epilogue, they mentioned the Malleus Maleficarum, or one of them does. I kind of have a hunch that that there might be a future Kanto that plays rather heavily on the Crucible, which that was that story was written back during the days of McCarthyism with the Red Scare and all that. But the story itself is set during the Salem witch trials. It also would also be rather, that story has also found quite a bit of relevance today with cancel culture being what it is. But that's going off topic. That said, with their view of prosthetics and recording technology, that probably has a connection to the League of Nine wanting to destroy all the mirror worlds, but What I'm not quite sure about is if they, if the league, if the goal of destroying all the mirror worlds is because the League of Nine is with N-Corp, or if they have that goal because they're with N-Corp. It's basically kind of a chicken and egg thing. Like, did they already have that goal, and because of that, they joined N-Corp because it would be pretty in line? It'd be viewed as being sort of a mutual interest, or did they join N-Corp, and then that led to them having that goal? I'm not sure. Of course, it's also worth noting they would probably think, for good reason, that they probably have the same view of Ego Gear, which I guess maybe they either don't, most of the people at N-Corp don't understand how Ego Gear actually works, because they don't know how it actually works and all that it's how it makes a person stronger, or they otherwise misunderstand it. Because it's worth noting that one of them, like I said, that scene with the League of Nine at the end of Kanto 9, they mentioned that be careful about watch what you say, watch what you say amongst the board, suggesting, which that does suggest that it's going to be a really big problem if they let slip stuff about Ego Gear, in particular how it works. Let's see. Okay, so did also mention like some of the IDs being used for foreshadowing. Actually, I didn't realize this till just now. The whole thing of that being a hunch of mine. So this ID might have kind of foreshadowed some of how Faust. It kind of foreshadows how Faust is viewed by the other Faust in the Gesellschaft. However, I did mention how in the second tragedy of Faust, Johann was actually an apprentice, and was actually the apprentice of the real Faust. Well, Faust, fitting for her character, a lot of her IDs are quite powerful and very capable individuals. But, particularly with some of her more recent IDs, because like you've got the House of Spiders Ring Apprentice, the Index Proselyte, her Heisho Pack Mao Branch Adept, which, yes, the Adept is like the most capable and highest ranking member of that Heisho Pack branch, but still answers to whoever holds the leash. What the heck was her ID for season 5? Oh yeah, LCE Ego Ardor Blossom Star, which is which was based on Alyssa, one of Hohenheim's assistants. That one's based on Sasha, I think it was, who was made into a 7th Kindred Blood Fiend by Cassetti. What were some of the others? Wuthering Heights Butler. A lot of these involve someone who, even if they're very high ranking or powerful, she's still answering to someone else, which would kind of be in line with, and which would kind of, if that might be kind of foreshadowing the fact that she might have actually been, and that she's not actually Faust, but rather is Johann, or the Johann to the real Faust of the world that the game is set in. But what I really want to point to is this identity, who is a member of the Ujat. Well, because the Ujat, they fought in the Smoke War, and it has been established that Otis is indeed a Smoke War veteran. But, hello there, unknown agent. I'm doing well. Yeah, so with the Ujat having fought in the Smoke War, as well as being answering directly to Diaz, they're basically her own private army. I kind of suspect that this ID sort of foreshadows part of Otis's big secret, as well as why it is that her real identity is redacted and all that. I think Otis at least was and might still be a member of the Ujat, just secretly. And that basically kind of her identity being redacted is kind of meant to cover that up. And to be honest, I suspect that she was not just a member of the Ujat, but is actually a color fixer. Because it stated that her power level was between that of Don Quixote and Ryoshu prior to all of the sinners being connected to Dante through their contract. We might actually end up going into the second Smoke War. Yeah, Otis is based on the Odyssey, but here's kind of the interesting thing. So Otis mentioned the gods with the 20 threads intervallo. So that indicates that she does have some familiarity with the index, and particularly that it's the gods that issue all of the prescripts. As for how exactly she knows that, three main possibilities. One is that she might have been a member of the index that was kind of, due to direction from the prescripts, was kind of on a deep cover thing that basically, get past even her being part of the Ujat, might have been her being a member of the index, joining the Ujat because of the prescripts. I mean, after all, the prescripts directed Ryan to basically be a carbon copy of Roland, so it's entirely possible. Second possibility is that she, perhaps before joining the Ujat, she lived in some territory that was under the index's control, which would result in her being familiar with the prescripts and how they're being issued by the gods. And the third possibility is that it was the index that was responsible for all the various trials that she went through during her trial home. Of those, I think that third one seems the most likely. But that said, I think Otis might be the reason why it is that Diaz, or rather that Limbus company, Diaz and by extension Limbus company, or whichever, came to know about all the various sinners. Because consider the Odyssey itself. So there's, you have, among the things that Odysseus dealt with, there was Circe, who turned people into animals. Well, the old G Corp used lot of genetic and bioaugmentation. Now, granted, they specifically insect-themed augmentations, but it does kind of apply in the case of Gregor. Of course, they probably would have known about that through the Smoke War, so there's that. But that said, well, when you consider the Heisho pack, yeah, that does also fit it pretty well. Even more so considering the fact that the Heisho pack, the 12 branches are themed for the Chinese zodiac. And one of the animals in the Chinese zodiac is a pig. Also been interesting too, because that's one of the ones that was not represented by the Heisho pack identities. So it's possible that whatever was analogous to Circe resulted in Otis perhaps learning about Hong Lu and possibly Gregor, probably more so Hong Lu, for the sake of, and kind of relayed that to Diaz. There's also the Den of the Lotus Eaters, which, if you're not familiar with the Odyssey, the Lotus Eaters, they were pretty welcoming and pretty gracious hosts to Odysseus and his men, and even treated them to a lot of the food and drink that they themselves ate. But this kind of clouded the minds of Odysseus and his men, causing them to forget that their journey, forget about the journey that they were on, and even forget about going home. Well, Diaz has been established to be the chief executive director of Limbus Company. I haven't read Distortion Detective either. Much of what I do know about Diaz is from TV tropes, to be honest. But in any case, so the whole thing with it kind of clouding one's mind and kind of not wanting them to leave, that sounds a lot like the kind of brainwashing that N-Corp does with their rations. Oh, you have no idea how bad she is. To give you an idea, to kind of give a bit of an idea of how bad she is, Diaz is supposed to be short for Ozymandias, as in the poem, "Look upon my works, ye mighty, in despair." But it's also worth noting is Diaz is also the Greek translation of the name Ramses. Which is probably part of the reason why the eponymous Distortion Detective is named Moses. But I digress. So the Lotus Eaters, that'd be a lot like the Lotus Eaters with how their food clouded the minds of Odysseus and his men, causing them to forget their journey. Oh, that sounds a lot like the rations that N-Corp has that they use to brainwash their soldiers. So it's likely that the Den of the Lotus Eaters, or at least what's going to be analogous to it, is going to be N-Corp, which naturally, since Otis was in the Den of the Lotus Eaters, that would probably lead to her learning about Marisol and Sinclair, especially with how Cromer was obsessed with Sinclair. Badger on what? You might, by the way, you might want to take some time to check out this stream on a VOD, because there's, oh, in the game, sure. VOD, video on demand, let's see. Tango 18167 815. Okay. I'm not sure if the invitation went out. I might as well check to make sure. I'm not gonna say no. Oh, derp. I had a brain fart there. Usually just kind of accept invites. So as I was saying, the Den of the Lotus. So yeah, the Den of the Lotus Eaters, that'd be N Corp. Let's see. Oh yeah, Odysseus also traveled to the underworld as part of during his Odyssey, and well, there's two things in the city that could apply to, and I don't really see how it is that it can't be that both of them are the case. So, first off, you've got the literal underworld of the ruins. Well, Don Quixote was holed up in like some kind of little cabin or something in the ruins. And that's about the best, Otis having, going to the ruins and happen to come across that little cabin. That's the best explanation I can think of as to how on earth, her coming across that and reporting that to Diaz. That's the best explanation I can think of as to how on earth Diaz and Limbus Company learned about Don Quixote. There's also the whole idea of a criminal underworld as well. And Ryoshu was quite the secret project. Well, sort of. It was apparently something of an open secret, at least amongst the fingers. But outside of that, I guess was not all that well known. Not to mention, Heathcliff also had some association with one of the fingers as well. I don't remember which one. Granted, he was with the Dead Rabbits, which was a syndicate, but they were associated with one of the fingers. But like I said, I don't remember which one. So that would probably explain how she knew about those two. A lot of the Odyssey involved traveling around at sea and encountering some monsters. Yeah, like the ones on the Great Lake, which is a proxy, an oracle proxy. Not necessarily. See, you have to remember, Odysseus was a soldier. And the thing is, though, he was a soldier who led his men, and I kind of suspect that, much like Moses, Otis led a unit of the Ujat, and because she's with the Ujat, she of course stayed in touch with Diaz and kept reporting back to her. About the only ones that I can think of that she might not have learned about during her, well, being an imposter, kind of, sort of. It's worth noting, Odysseus did use disguises during his Odyssey, twice actually. Once was actually just before he set out on his journey, when he disguised himself for the whole stratagem that involved using the Trojan horse. The second time was when he got back. Actually, no, there's 3 times, because nope, twice, my bad. The second time was when he got back to Ithaca. He disguised himself as an old man. And so, yeah. About the only ones I can think of that she might not have learned about along the way were that I can't think of a way that she might have learned about them were Rodion, Faust, and Yi Sang. But the thing is, he's saying he's a pretty famous researcher. They probably would have known about him already. Faust already worked for them. Sure. I don't mind. Let's see. Then there's... Yeah, that's about it. Let's see. There's also... Well, kind of one other really big theory I have is regarding Diaz and her being the... So she's the CEO or CED, whichever, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Executive Director, whichever term you want to use, for Limbus Company. And her goal is to supplant the head. Suffice to say, there's probably going to be a really big smoke war going on in order for her to pull that off. And there's also a lot of stuff about Diaz, where there's quite a few questions surrounding her, such as, how did she manage to amass so much wealth and power? And in the case of that one, I suspect it's because she has a tendency to make deals that benefit her more through more than just the person she makes the deal with holding up their end of the bargain. So, for example, with Kanto 9, she's the one that arranged the whole thing with... Alright. I'll check those out after I finish my theories. With Kanto 9, Diaz is the one who's responsible for the... Well, she basically orchestrated the events of the Kanto, the raid on Limbus Company headquarters, as well as Operation Spider-Pyre, for the sake of fulfilling Ryoshu's contract. Well, in the process of doing that... Pardon me. Most, if not all of the... Freaking clankers, man. Time to make like N Corp and smash a bot. Okay. As I was saying, as I understand, each of the Nurse Fathers had a relic, which at least most of them probably would have been recovered from, probably would have been obtained as a result of Operation Spider-Pyre. And naturally, these relics, they're very powerful weapons. But what's more is, like in the case of the Ujat, she probably... Because I kind of have a hunch that the Ujat, they're a fixer office that acts as her private army. And I kind of suspect that what she does is that she takes contracts from other people that she then, basically in order to fulfill those contracts, she contracts the Ujat in the office to fill those contracts. But what that also means, it's going to become like a holy word, something like that. Because the Ujat are the ones filling the contract, they actually answer directly to Diaz in that capacity, which means that the person who contracted Diaz isn't the one dictating what isn't able in a position to dictate what the Ujat can and cannot do, meaning that she could actually have them have the Ujat. She could give them extra orders like, oh yeah, report back any secrets that you find. Or DS sabotage your own men. Well, it's because when it comes to Operation Spider Pyre as well as the raid on LCB Corp. Welcome on in, Lily Alternus. So during she orchestrated that in order to fulfill the contract with Ryoshu, basically to fulfill the wish. I got your hair coupons right here. Pulled them yesterday. So basically, it was to fulfill the wish, if you will, that was part of the contract for Ryoshu's employment. And that wish was for Ryoshu to see her daughter again and kill all their nurse fathers. Which meant that couldn't really have the Ujat killing the nurse fathers. Yeah, I heard about them being a hidden boss of the Mirror Dungeon. I think I've got to avoid that theme pack, at least for a little while. I suppose it'd be doable if it was not a hard mode dungeon. If it was hard mode, ugh. I don't even want to think about that. Past 10 to 15. Oh. Yeah, I haven't gone past floor 5 as of yet. I'm not so sure I have a team that's actually up to snuff. That's actually up to that task. But anyway, so as I was saying, I suspect that a lot of the contracts that DS ends up taking with people, it's basically such that it's both sides of the contract are a win for her. I want to fight that monster. I always get her with her bullshit Eye of Odin. Yeah. That one could be a real pain, I wager. Let's see what the heck else was there. Oh yeah. So kind of one other thing about some of DS's goals, particularly not exactly an ulterior motive, more like an additional way that she's able to benefit herself, especially when it comes to achieving her goal of supplanting the head. So she's gonna need some very powerful weapons and the like at her disposal, which, as it so happens, Ego, yeah, that would definitely fit the bill, especially as proven by, let's see, my list until now on hidden bosses: Callisto, Valencia, Matthias, Ryan. Yeah. Anyway, with Ego, it's been established that someone wielding Ego can fight on the level of an arbiter. I mean, the red mist demonstrated that. Not to mention that F. Flores Ego can make for a pretty potent weapon, as well as a lot of people as a lot of characters in the Limbus company have demonstrated. Kim Jong-un won't let me fight other hidden bosses than Valencina. It's the random number gods, man. So, what's more is it's also been established that distortions can also be if the person's a stable enough, if the person is a stable enough distortion, they could be used as something of a, they could probably be used as something of a living super weapon, which Library of Verona has established, which, again, kind of that whole thing. Has, that whole thing with Efflorist Ego, as well as Ego Gear and Distortions. Well, yeah, dealing with Distortions, that is kind of one of the big businesses that Limbus Company is involved in, because like that's the main thing that really distinguishes themselves as a business in the setting. My favorite is Kalisto mainly because Ring Lu. I could see it. Then there's, so basically with kind of the whole thing of managing distortions and abnormalities, she could basically use that to stockpile a whole bunch of very potent weapons. Or maybe Dante's the head secretly. I've really wondered who exactly Dante might turn out to be. Although speaking of Dante, so you have one guy who has a pretty heavy religious theme, helping 12 people that are following him, that he gives a lot of advice to. Let's see, I want to believe Dante's ex. Technically speaking, in the start of the game, they say something people have never done is to kill someone like Dante. So I do kind of, naturally there is kind of like some parallels between, with Dante and the sinners, there's kind of some parallels between Christ and his apostles. Of course, once again, one of the apostles, Judas, betrayed him. And there's been like some stuff where it's like kind of questioning that Otis might be the one that suggests that Otis might be the one betraying them. And I think there's probably going to be a twist of sorts, because it's worth noting when it comes to the various sinners and them being based on a literary counterpart, Project Moon has taken some artistic liberties. I suspect that with Otis, she might be the one who ends up being sort of the Judas out of the 12 sinners, but she's going to choose not to betray Dante. Rather, it's going to be just revealed that she was kind of planted there to be either as like some kind of fail-safe or Deus in disguise. I don't think that's the case. In fact, let's see, fixers in offices. Well, they might be related. Yeah, sorry about that. But that said, with Otis, like I said, I think she might be kind of outed as being sort of the Judas of the group, but she's going to end up choosing not to betray Dante or the other sinners. It's all according to Kikaku? Who's Kikaku? Eh. It's according to plan, but in Japanese. Okay. So anyway, it spelled it wrong. Possibly. Anyway, so as I was saying, with so kind of this whole thing of Limbus company having a big part of their business being dealing with distortions, that makes for a very well dealing with distortions as well as abnormalities that are on the loose. Well, that makes for a very convenient way for Keikaku. Okay. It makes for a very convenient way for Limbus Company and by extension DS to stockpile a lot of very potent weapons. Weapons that might perhaps be about on par with relics. But what's more is that the sinners, well, they're also, as it so happens, they're probably a very convenient way to kind of do some experimentation with weapons, the singularity. Well, it's pretty much what ego weapons. Ego, pretty much weapons, or at least ego gear. I'm still unsure what exactly it is that DS plans to do with, grafting the golden boughs into a sapling for the, was it Tree of Light? Yeah, I don't know what exactly it is that she plans to do with that, because it seems that there's a lot that can be done. For example, there's so there's kind of the whole thing with the Faust and the classic Walpurgis Nacht mentioning that if well, I kind of want to see more actually. I didn't play Library, so I don't know about relics. They look OP. A lot of them are very OP. I haven't played much of Library of Ruina either. But anyway, the whole thing with the apple that could be harvested from the from a sapling made from grafting the golden boughs together. Consider the fact that the Faust said that managing to do that could perhaps lead to Faust getting methodized sword is a relic. So the fact that they said that she or workshop weapon, no, it's a relic. Although now that you mention it, maybe the relics are actually just like these workshop weapons and stuff from like some old era where the technology and methods to make them have been lost. Huh. Anyway, so they meant, the Faust mentioned, being able to harvest an apple from a sapling made from the golden boughs, and that could lead to her regaining her administrative position in the Gesellschaft. Kind of thinking on it, that could perhaps be a reference to the fruit of the tree of knowledge from the book of Genesis, or I suppose, if you will, the forbidden fruit, because in many depictions, the forbidden fruit is depicted as an apple. So, yeah, there's probably going to be like some big fight or Gambit pileup involving the Golden Bows. Oh yeah, I remember where it was. So speaking of the kind of the whole thing with like stockpiling, very potent weapons to use in a smoke war. Well, I suspect that part of the purpose of the LCB team is to test that part of the LCB team's purpose is to kind of do some research, well, a bit of research and development with the mirror technology, particularly like getting IDs and using egos, but as well as kind of field testing quite a bit of that. And because it is pretty clear that IDs would make for a very potent weapon. However, I suspect that there's yet another ulterior motive to having the LCB team, and this might end up being some kind of thing where like the LCB team ends up, kind of having to choose, kind of picking a side of sorts, because it was stated that there's, they can't leave their contract except under very specific circumstances. Well, they would not have said that if those specific circumstances or conditions do not end up being met at some point in the game's story. And my hunch is that at some point they may end up having to decide whether or not to side with or against Diaz. Or perhaps even, which side to take, Diaz, N-Corp, the Head, or maybe yet some other side, I'm not sure. But the thing is, consider all the capabilities that's been shown for all of the Sinners, and it's possible that them being connected, it brought all of them, it brought kind of even out their power to be on the level of what Sinclair's was. But it's been shown that Sinclair definitely has the potential to become a color fixer. Otis, I suspect, was a color fixer. Gregor was genetically engineered. We see like some genetically engineered bio augmentations to such that he can become a living super weapon, one that is at least on the par of a near mythical color fixer like the Red Gaze, but it probably has power exceeding even that. Heathcliff inherently has the same kind of power to sort of raise the dead and travel between mirror worlds that the Earl King and the Earl King Heathcliff has. Ryoshu, as the wielder of the Arayashiki, possesses power that is probably about on par with a color fixer. At least if she were to wield the full power of it. And if it was such that she was able to wield the full power of it without drawbacks, she would absolutely be on the par of a color fixer. Don Quixote is a centuries-old second kindred blood fiend. Well, it might be an ascended second kindred, considering she's the sole survivor. Don't know a whole lot about Marisalt's past, but it has been made very clear that he's a very capable individual he's an individual who's very capable at, well, anything he's ordered to do. So I kind of have to wonder if maybe, however strong this, like maybe the strongest of them when they were before they were brought on. Maybe that kind of set the ceiling for how powerful each of them could get. But on top of that, you've got a team of 12 people who keep getting stronger and stronger. They've got access to various IDs that a lot of them are quite powerful, and what's worse, the IDs keep getting more powerful because ever since season 5, well, with season 5, there's a sharp increase in the number of triple O identities, and starting with season 6 or Kanto 8, whichever, there have not been any double O identities being added to the game. So, combine that with the fact that they also have resurrective immortality and can presumably be resurrected mid-fight, at least canonically. Maybe not in terms of gameplay, but in terms of story. And what you have is a, well, relatively small elite team of super soldiers. So I kind of have a hunch that that might be Diaz's, big plan concerning the LCB team. That they're going to be sort of the linchpin in whatever sort of plans or strategy that she has cooked up for the second Smoke War coming up. Rodion might not have a whole lot special about her, but considering the fact that she does want to be special, well, it's probably safe to say that she'd be willing to agree to getting augmentations of some kind to boost her power. Of course, then again, a lot of her IDs are by no means a slouch. I did have a theory for a bit that DS might have had a way of looking into possible futures. That was mostly based on the fact that the LCB team being comprised of all of the people that it is, it seems like quite the contrived coincidence, but considering the possibility of Otis having learned about most of them, yeah, I'm not so sure about that theory anymore. Could just be that DS just has, a good source of intel. Let's see. Yeah, kind of another theory. What's funny is, like, this, I came up with this theory before, well, half of it was confirmed. So with how there's like some power creep with like new IDs and egos that get added to the game, I suspected that it was going to be relatively soon that Project Moon was going to add a 5th uptight tier for IDs and egos, and it was like within a couple of weeks of me suspecting that they would do that, they announced that they were going to do that with egos. Oddly enough, I thought they were going to do that with IDs first, though. But I suspect they're probably going to do that in large part mostly to make some of the older IDs a bit more competitive, particularly a lot of the older triple O IDs. Maybe also to make some of the double O IDs more useful. And also with, you know, like I said, some of the power creep going on, and in particular the fact that with, so with Season 6 and 7, it's all triple O IDs. I would not be too surprised if, well, I'm not quite sure exactly how soon in the future it could be, because, you know, it was not until, well, Kanto 7 that triple IDs started becoming really common. Maybe it's Kanto 6, I'm not sure. I kind of wonder if maybe at some point they're gonna start adding quadruple O IDs. I kind of hope not, mostly because if they do that, I kind of hope that they adjust the ego shard cost for double O and triple O. I am a bit concerned about what the cost of, you know, fully up getting egos to up type 5 might be, because like to get to up type 4 you need 150 ego shards, or maybe that just depends on the tier of the ego. Let me check. Oh, it does. Well, hopefully they cut the ego shard cost, or maybe just drop it, because it would be an up type 5. Yeah, it's going to be crazy expensive. I mean, in terms of a thread cost, I could see it being a bit justified. Because... Oh, wait, no, not that. There we go. With this, if you skip the battle, you could get 18 thread. Yeah, like I said, I am kind of, particularly with them adding like up type 5 for ego, and you know the prospect of them adding, you know, the possibility of them adding quadruple O IDs, and maybe an up type 5 for the IDs that are in the game. I would not be too surprised if they either decrease the ego shard cost for some of the upties, or if they make it so that you can get more ego shards, possibly through ego shard crates. I mean, if that's the case, it's probably going to be that they make it so that players can get more ego shard crates specifically. But yeah, that is... Up type 5 by 2-star IDs and thread spin 5 by Magical Girl Hong Lu. Magical Girl Hong Lu? Which ID is that? Oh! Yeah, I don't have that ego yet. I think that... Is that one standard fare? I probably should be trying to collect more ego. Let's see. Heal 2 others, the lowest HP percentages for 15 HP. Yeah. Obviously, is it heal the ally with the lowest HP for 8 HP? Yeah. I mean, I guess stuff like this might be part of the reason as to why it is that they're adding up type 5. Because this one could really use it. I wonder what this one does. Huh. Yeah, this one would not be too bad for... Yeah, this one would go pretty well with an up type 5, I'd say. When an enemy is defeated, the ally has at least 8 SP, heals 1 SP. The amount of SP healed increases by 2, maximum 9. Not too bad. Yeah, I haven't seen that animation. So I need to... These would all be egos. Derp. I don't think Ryoshu has gotten any egos that are sinking. Yeah, that one's Tremor, right? Yeah. Just one sinking ID. Okay. Yeah, the one that she got from the last Valpurgis knocked. Which... And like I said, kind of interesting how she has so few, considering the fact that sinking would actually be kind of thematic with being the wielder of the Araya Shiki, both with how it's able to just erase things as well as the toll it takes on her own memories. I think she does a lot of burn and bleed, though. And there's... Was this one... Yeah, this one was bleed. So is this one, if I remember right. Yeah. Well... Ishmael isn't depressed, but she's got quite a few sinking IDs as well. And you've got the Jiang's office rep and the Bowler Boatworks fixer. Keep in mind she went through sanity slippage during her focus kanto, so plus the DAC Association, those IDs, they basically they basically take knowledge that they have and kind of burn it to power up their attacks, which is why they inflict sinking. Because I have kind of noticed that quite a few sinners, there's like some effects that are very strongly tied to them. Like, you know, sinking is one for Sinclair, or not Sinclair, Yi Sang. When is the poise season gonna start? Well, we have been getting a lot of poise. It's often poise mixed with something else. What I want to see is a like a season that makes use of burn, tremor, charge, because those ones really haven't seen much. I mean, charge especially, because like burn, it's like a few IDs here and there with a season. Tremor has seen claim that boys are the full stop duo. I don't think there's gonna be much of the way of not just pure poise, but IDs that are just a single keyword anymore. I think they're probably gonna be all hybrids of some kind. But yeah, that's about all the theories that I have. I am kind of curious if the game theorists might perhaps be a bit interested in some of the theories that, yeah, because hybrid works in NDE. Game theorists, the folks would say, but hey, that's just a theory, a game theory. Well, in this case, it didn't have a game theory, it had about 18 of them. Are you Zwei? Oh, Mirror Dungeon Extreme. Oh, yeah, I see that. But welcome on in, Eggsgami. Yeah, Zwei. Oh, Zwei Association. It's funny. I actually did. I actually do look that part, but I didn't actually had this model made way before I even knew about Project Moon's games. Sometimes life is just kind of funny like that. But anyway, like I said, kind of finished up going through about all the theories that I've got, at least so far. Figure I might as well raid out. Well, let's see. Yeah, raid this one. Nalu? Is that her name? But, as always, folks, thank you for watching. Peace be with you this day and always. Take care. Oh! Yeah, that's right, I forgot about the videos. Sorry. You've heard of a false start? Well, this was a bit of a false end. My bad.
Alas, executive. Alas, executive manager, I must now betray you for tragic backstory reasons. You do not seem surprised.
Second, experience one of the most untrustworthy things I've ever seen. Do this face, you know, the one. Yep.
Listen up, men. To sneak into Nagel and Hammer, we will be employing my flawless Trojan horse method. Gregor, what are your measurements?
Even if you were dressed weirdly, my son, I'm still glad to see you're finally in the right path. I'll give you some time alone before we unwrap your present together.
Amateurs.
Nice. All right. Now I'll raid out. Okay, there we go. But like I was saying, as always, folks, thanks for watching. Peace be with you this day and always.